If I was one of your constituents in Totnes right now and I'd voted Leave in the referendum, I'd voted what I thought was a Tory through and through, a Tory blood MP, I'm waking up this morning realising the person that I held in charge, I want to represent me in Houses of Parliament, is no longer the person I thought I was. What would you be saying to those constituents right now?
What I'd be saying to them is, having looked at the evidence about how catastrophic a no deal would be for the area that I represent, that I can't actually be advocating a no deal. And I have to say that loud and clear and talk about the evidence of why that is. And I also know that working as an independent in the Commons, you can't get so much done. So if I want to campaign for things like social justice and to be making the case, the unequivocal case, for us to remain within the European Union and absolutely reject no deal, it's much better for me to work together with a group of MPs who are doing just that. So I think it's about how I can best represent the best interests of South Devon.
But that's in your view, though, isn't it, Sarah?
Chair on the Health Committee, listening to that.
That's in your view, though, isn't it, Sarah? Because your constituency voted 53.9% to Leave, higher than the average vote, although we know the country voted out. You're there to represent them. They also, presumably, many of them voted for you as a Tory MP on other Tory party policies. So for you to come to the personal decision that you want to move to Liberal Democrats, wouldn't the fair thing to be to say, I'm standing down, I'm calling a by-election, you guys tell me what you think of my new position?
Well, I think, first of all, that my constituents didn't vote for no deal. Some of them will have done, but many others voted for a much more constructive approach. And so that the point is that we're terribly divided. Even within my constituency, the South Hams part of my constituency voted to remain and the Torbay part of my constituency voted to leave. And so we're terribly divided as a nation, constituencies, even families. And the only way we're going to resolve this, I think, is by actually having a vote on the deal, or indeed no deal versus remain. That's the preferred position. But on your point about the election, of course there should be an election in Totnes. There should be a general election. And we have a Prime Minister who's been voted in by less than a fifth of 1% of the population, who's pursuing a really catastrophically dangerous economic path by taking us out with no deal. We've seen the evidence of that. So I think it's Boris Johnson that should be calling an election on himself and Totnes, and I'd welcome that. So I think there should be a vote of no confidence in the government when we return, and I'd love to see an election, and then of course everyone will have the chance to have their say.
Yeah, but so you just mentioned there's something quite key, the vote of no confidence. That would come before a general election, so you would have a vote in there, but your constituents you're not the person representing those constituents. So you can't be sure how many people who voted Leave want to no deal. The only way you can be sure, and anyone can be sure, is to have a by-election and have candidates being very clear as to what their position is and let the people in your constituency decide.
But the point is that what I think we need is for people to be able to pass their judgment on what type of Brexit they want. And I think the best way to do that, given that we've got a Prime Minister that's come in who's really, let's face it, more than 99% of the population have no say whatsoever in this. And we're now being pushed into a position where we're going to crash out with no deal, with disastrous consequences in a very short space of time. So I think the right thing to do is to go back to the whole country. So yes, there should be an election in Totnes, but there should be an election everywhere. We all have the right to have a final say on this before we take this very major step, which we know will have very serious economic consequences.
What about all the other differences between, say, Conservative policy and Lib Dem policy? I mean, you've got a record. You've almost always voted for reducing housing benefit for social tenants deemed to have excess bedrooms. Consistently voted against paying higher benefits over longer periods for those unable to work due to illness or disability. Now, some will argue some Lib Dem MPs back then in the coalition also voted that way. However, hardened Lib Dem supporters will say that actually that is not Lib Dem policy and you should actually be supporting those minorities and those people. What would you say to those people? And have you changed your views on those too?
Well, I think that the point is that if you look at my record, you see I've got quite a long track record of voting against the Tory position on things like universal credit and so forth, and making a very strong case. But as you know, sometimes you have to make an argument within your party, and sometimes you don't win that argument. But I was first selected by the first open primary in the country, so I was very comfortable, and I do have always had a lot of sympathy and goodwill working alongside Liberal Democrat colleagues. That's always been very much a centrist MP, and so I don't think I changed my values, but I think that the Tory party absolutely has changed. It's changed beyond recognition to the party that I joined and was first elected in 2010, and I think that's something that I could no longer support their policies, and I say there was no tackling of the burning injustices, and I think we need now a party in government that's really going to make a difference on those issues.
So you are against a no-deal Brexit. You want a general election. Mm-hmm. The leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, has written to people that as Remain supporters or in your position don't want a no-deal Brexit. He said, back me, I will push for a vote of no confidence of Boris Johnson. I will then be the leader of a government for a bit, and I'll put a time limit on it, and I will then call a general election. If that's what you want, why don't you go Labour? Because it looks like your reason for choosing the Liberal Democrats is about those very issues. I would say is that if the Leader of the Opposition, because it's only the Leader of the Opposition that can table a vote of no confidence, I hope he does that. I shall be voting no confidence in the government. The question is then what happens next? And I think he is being rather unrealistic about the possibility of the wider House of Commons supporting him and giving him confidence. And I think realistically, it's much more likely to happen that we'll get an interim government if he steps aside, and indeed all party leaders step aside, and that we have a trusted, more independent-minded figure who heads that temporary arrangement up. And there are very many senior figures who would probably be in a better position to command that support. And we're talking about a very, very temporary arrangement. And I don't think that Jeremy Corbyn should be insisting that it's him. He may well be a member of the Labour Party, but I think that it shouldn't be Jeremy Corbyn, simply for the reason that I just don't think he would have the numbers there across the Commons, and I suspect he knows that. OK, let me ask you then, you've already left the Tory party to go to Change UK and then Independent. What about current sitting Tory MPs? Boris Johnson only has a majority of one currently now, doesn't he? Do you know from chatting with your former Tory colleagues, do you know that there are maybe other Tory MPs who are also considering joining the Liberal Democrats or leaving?
The conversations I have is that very many of my former colleagues are absolutely horrified that we may be taken out with no deal. And they're all thinking very carefully about what their options are. I hope that several of them will come and join me on the Liberal Democrat benches. I know many of them are very close to that, but those are discussions that they need to have separately. It's not for me to speak for others. But there are other ways that this could be achieved, as I say, by having a constructive temporary government of national unity, taking those Conservatives who really can't support no deal alongside moderate Labour MPs, Liberal Democrats, members from across the House. But I think to say that any particular one party leader should head that up, I get
that. You made that point very well. How many are you thinking might be currently Tory MPs?
Well, as I say, it's for them. It would be no more than a handful. But when you've only got a majority of one, it becomes completely unsustainable. I think the point is about the Johnson administration is they're forcing something through with a majority of one without knowing whether that's what the country wants, and where they absolutely know that the consequences, the real world consequences, would be terrible. I mean, let's face it, if you have such a great policy idea, why do you have to spend billions on mitigating the consequences of it, like air freighting in medicines and food and planning for civil contingencies for unrest? I mean, this is not a great policy. They know it, and they shouldn't be pursuing it.
Okay.
Good to talk to you, and good to talk to you in your new world and your new party first thing this morning. Good to speak to you.
Thank you. Please come and join me. Thanks.
I'm not sure we can. We're not really MPs.
Well, where was she?
And we're politically impartial.
Maybe she meant she was going.
Lovely offer. Maybe
I think she was going for a coffee to Costa.
Well, that I will gladly join
the party.
Sarah to join her. I'd love that.